Hello witches, and welcome back to Activist Witch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about what I do during October, but also November, the thinning of the veil, and the kind of practices that I do to try and feel closer to my spirit team, which for me is mainly my ancestors. Before we get started, let me remind you that Witches for Palestine Phase 2 is active. You can participate in the raffle by doing a donation to Witches to Gaza. All the details in its specific video linked down in the description below. And also, I've opened a coffee, which is an alternative to Patreon that takes less from creators. And on there you can do a one-off donation, a monthly donation, or even get a tarot reading with me, Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And for the foreseeable future, all my income from tarot readings goes indeed to Witches to Gaza, who are part of the mutual aid groups that supports Palestinian people evacuate to Egypt. So if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much. The funny thing is that I've had a perception of October is when you do spooky, not necessarily, but spiritual stuff for much longer than I have been practicing. I said it before, Italy as a culture that is steeped into this kind of superstition, even if we don't call ourselves witches or calling that witchcraft. Cartomancers, tarot readers, are something so pervasive and common that I guess it comes from that. I remember that reading tarot during October in Italy was definitely a thing where the idea was you would get more precise information about the future, about anything, because the spirits would have an easier time communicating through the veil. And I'm talking about the entirety of my life here, much longer than the 2 years that I've been currently practicing witchcraft. Something that I remember from, I think, a tarot reading that was done on Samhain night in 2010 was that the cards were extremely bold. They were extremely slap in the face, even from a deck that the reader didn't necessarily say was going to do that kind of thing. This was just a friend reading for me. And I think it's interesting that that kind of thing can go on. So I know that usually, not only it's the Sabbath of Samhain, but it's also Halloween, it's commercialized. The bright side of it for us witches is that there are all these decorations that capitalism has recognized they can sell to us. And when we are lucky and we find them for a low cost at places like TK Maxx, joy, because our house is actually Halloween themed 366 days per year, despite the fact that capitalism sells it to us just a couple of months per year. So basically in those 2 months we buy everything that we want to actually keep around the entirety of the year. At least that's me. And again, since before I was actually practicing. Something that stuck with me from last year, and it's what made me think about actually doing this video, is that if you've seen my first video about ancestral communication, ancestral signs, it is from a few days before Samhain last year in 2023. I was doing a prosperity spell, a bath spell, and during that I meditated, and the likely suggestion of everyone that I've spoken to was, no, that was your grandfather giving you information. Hello? The pros and cons of being on wholesale lists for witchy stuff. It's Halloween and they're like, are you sure you don't want to take some alchemy items for your shop? And I was like, if I had the money, I would get one of everything. Besides the fact that I got distracted, let's see if we can go back to what I was saying. So going along the idea that Samhain, for whatever reason, because it's getting to the proper dark side of the year, but for whatever reason, if the veil thins, and then we can get messages easier, then doing meditations and working with tarot is definitely something to do. Something that I haven't done, and I am committing myself to do this month, is to do more often readings with the deck that I use specifically for my ancestors, for my grandparents. I keep my ancestors on such high regard that actually I do not practice often with them because of this performance anxiety that I have in a way, because either something is done so heavily and so serious as it's an entire ritual and it's an entire spell, and I do not engage, and I should, not casually, but with less pressure, because that way at least it allows me to do it. So if I were to commit and say I'm going to do a daily tarot pull with the deck that I've dedicated to my ancestors, I don't think I can live up to that. Daily is a lot. But the idea of, you know what, every Saturday, which is, you know, the day of Saturn, and so the day that has to do somehow with death in a way. If every Saturday I want to pull a card or 3 cards to see if my ancestors have messages for me, I would definitely do that commitment for October. And November as well. I think the reason why I personally feel so connected to this time of the year, beside Halloween, beside the witchiness, beside even Samhain, is that in my little village in Italy, 600 people, one of the biggest events of the year for the village was the 1st of November, All Saints. Because on the 1st of November, the entire village would be at the cemetery for a social gathering. I'm not even joking about that. Like, you don't go necessarily to the cemetery that day to respect or bring anything to your deads, but you do it because you need to clean the gravestones, clean everything, and you show it off to the rest of the village, because the priest of the village will come and bless the entirety of the cemetery, row by row, bit by bit. So something that I remember since being a child is the 1st of November is Cemetery Day. And then I realized actually All Saints. There's even a mass done in the cemetery in my village. So I think that is what actually stuck with me more than Halloween wasn't a thing when I was a child, not in Europe. All those things, beautiful now, but the thing that stuck with me, and I think the reason why I feel so connected to my grandparents because of that, is because of All Saints. And it's because on the 1st of November, you go to the cemetery, you clean the gravestones, and you're there to take the blessing given by the priest for your ancestors that are dead, that have passed before you. And it's something that I used to do with my grandparents as well. Like, it's one of the few occasions in which they would actually go out in society, so to speak. My grandparents were they kept to themselves. But those was one of the few occasions in which they would go out, because you need to show yourself. My grandfather had always this thing about, you go out with your head high. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You go out with your head high. In hindsight, I do wonder if it was his way to actually tell me, it doesn't matter how much people try to take you down because you're mixed race, because you're weird. You go out with your head high because you've never done anything wrong. Bless him. That was his way, for his understanding, to try and make me feel part of something, which, as a white man born in 1911, it's a lot. I give a lot of credit to both my grandfather and my grandmother to be that kind of person, even from the background that they came from. Meditations with ancestors, and I'm telling this to myself first, it's easier than it sounds, because if the idea of meditation is you stay still, you think of nothing, you just let time go by and observe time goes by, which sounds a lot similar to let's watch the paint dry on the walls, let's watch the grass grow, which some people with some kind of neurodivergences, it might feel like you are a bit going insane. With ancestors meditations, the few that I have done, it's not exactly like that. Yes, there is silence, but there's also focus. Because personally, when I did the prosperity spell that then became a meditation with my grandfather, I was just trying to focus and imagine, what does prosperity mean to me? And so, am I visualizing a number in the bank? Am I visualizing a certain kind of feeling? And something that came to me in that spell that then drove me to my grandfather was the feeling that I had with him when he took me to the bank. He had saved his entire life so that in his pension year, as a pensioner, he had created something safe enough for his family, for me, for his wife, for his daughter, who was my mother. And that was a sense of complete safety. I am taken care of. For all the material needs, I am taken care of. So that's where my idea of prosperity jumped to. And then from that I was like, oh, of course, Nonno. Nonno knew how to keep us safe, how to build that prosperity that allowed me to be safe and then to grow. And so after that, then I started to have these images about places in the town that I was raised into. And immediately with the images would come, oh, there's this related to that, oh, there's this related to that. Which to this day, I go back and I try to be skeptical about, but it's just a very peculiar feeling of, but it all makes sense. And it's all stuff that I haven't thought about in 20, 30 years. And suddenly it came to me when I was in the bath thinking of prosperity and my grandfather. Even if it is, thank you, brain. Thank you, brain, for bringing back for a moment that feeling of what it felt like to be cared for and loved by the closest thing that I had to parents, which were my grandparents, and my nonno specifically, who was the first one to die. So I have very few years that I spent with him, and looking back, I wish they could have been different. I wish I could have been closer to him. If nothing else, taking half an hour out of your day in the darkening days of October, sitting in a room in silence, thinking about your ancestors or going through old pictures of them, that feels like it could already be enough to sort of knock on the veil that way and say, hey, should you have anything to say, I'm already here thinking of you. So if you feel like coming around, that'd be nice. There's another point for me, which is the 29th of October was also the birthday of my grandmother. So for 2 years now, I've told myself, I want to do something to remember that. One of the most important things of my witchcraft practice is how much attention it made me spend onto my beloved dad, because I never thought before for like 30 years about when was the birthday of my grandmother, when was the anniversary of her death. I've never thought or never celebrated those things before I got into witchcraft 2 years ago. And then I started to pay attention and to hear about how important it can be ancestor practice if it's something that you want to get into. And in my unluckiness of being, a survivor of childhood abuse, I also am lucky enough that my grandparents were the closest thing to a grounding family that I had. They did their best with the means that they had to keep me safe and protected from my father, from my mother. And I know that I am lucky in that. I know that sometimes people don't know their ancestors, or sometimes they do know them and they were bad people. And don't worry, I have bad people in my ancestor line as well, because again, both my parents are still alive and they are awful people. And I fear in a way the moment that they will pass and they will be around my team on the other side. Let's not think about that. But actually, if you don't know your ancestors of the blood, there's the beautiful book by Nancy Hendrickson, Ancestral Tarot, which considers 3 kinds of ancestors. Ancestor of the land, so people that have been in the place that you are before you. Ancestors of the blood, as in your family. But also ancestors that were spirits, people, incarnate with you in past lives, if you believe in that kind of thing. And she has all these tarot spreads to try and communicate with them. So that is definitely something that, if you'd like to dip your toes into ancestral practice, it's something that lets you get into that just with a tarot deck. If you have trouble with meditation, if, like me, you're not sure, is it my brain or is it someone sending me something? Tarot is it's cards that you pull. And once you try to give sense to them, to me, that's actually the moment of I'm being unfair. The moment of magic is also when I pick the card, because sometimes there are cards that come out that I'm like, unequivocal. But part of the magic, and I notice that especially when I read for other people, is in the moment when you see the cards and you give them meaning together. And I don't necessarily notice it in the moment, but when I go back and read tarot readings that I've done for other people in hindsight, and I'm like, if you ask me now, I wouldn't read that card that way. But then there was something in that context that makes me feel that that card needs to be read that way. And every time I'm told, oh, this resonates so much. And every time I'm surprised. Every time I'm like, are you sure? Because these are random cards and I don't know you. So there is definitely something in my perspective, in my unverified personal gnosis, that the moment of magic in tarot, along with picking the cards, is also the way that your brain starts to put meanings onto that. Because I think that space between synapses when you start to create meaning from the cards that you've pulled, that's the kind of messages. Whether it's from your higher self, whether it's from spirits, whether it's from anything else that we can't touch and we don't know, I think that's the magic of tarot. So if nothing else, if meditation sounds weird, my brain is bleeding because silence and watching the paint dry, tarot is a nice approach to have, and Ancestral Tarot, it's a great way if you specifically want to try and use that to get in touch with your spirit team on the other side. And October might be a good time for that. Does it make sense, or am I just talking gibberish and this is not worth making a video about? By the way, October getting darker is also personally a time that I think it's fair to give yourself some time for rest. Rest itself can be part of the practice, if you ask me. It's something that I'm coming to terms recently. If you've seen my video on phase 2 of Witches for Palestine, I talk about it there as well, because pacing and resting and recharging are all part of the way that then you put energy back into the world. If you never sit back and take that energy and make that energy for yourself, you can't pour from an empty cup. So I think that there's enormous value as well, and I think that's why we go into, I want everything cozy, let me put pumpkins and some autumnal sounds on the TV so that it gives me this feeling of coziness, warm cup of chai tea, and it's all completely fair, and I think it's fair to just take time. And it's not even time to do nothing, it's time for self-care, it's time to give yourself that warm hug. We need that. Without that, there's not a day that then we can have the energy to then do something else for the rest of the world. Those are the things that I am learning myself now, and I'm sharing with you, because I think that if everybody kept this in mind, we'd be able to, have that infamous choir, that it's the energy that we put into the world, and then you can take a moment of rest to recharge your vocal cords, and then you can go back to sing and somebody else can take a rest. Rest is important. I cannot stress this enough. It's ironic that I'm saying stress along with rest. No, just rest, no stress about it. I have to also highlight a thing about expectations. Oh, it's just a month. It's just 31 days out of the entire year. You have to cram anything there if it's spiritual. It's also not the case. I think that's why I try to highlight taking the time, meditation, because it's not something that requires so much work for it. Like an example that I can give is that last year my coven was planning on meeting for Samhain. We meet at every Sabbath and Esbats, and the plan was to do a damp supper, and there was all this ritualism around it and try to make it work, and then it became so stressful that we didn't do it, and so we didn't do anything at all. So I'm giving you this example to bring back again the fact that I know how high my expectation for my own practice is for myself, and I know how much that hinders me with the idea of, if it's not perfect, it's not worth doing. That is something that we need to move away from, and it's very hard for my autistic brain to even conceive the possibility. But if I light a black candle and I look into it for 5 minutes and I let it burn for my grandparents, is better than having done nothing, because the pressure of doing something bigger just in the end paralyzed me and made me do nothing. So it's that kind of thing that I would suggest. And again, I know that the perception is it all ends on the 31st because it's Samhain. Samhain, actually, it's in between the equinox and the solstice, so I think technically it's the 10th or 12th of November, but also because we are going into the darker side of the year, do give November a chance. November is my favorite month of the year. Do give November a chance. Don't think that everything stops on the 31st of October, because as with many things, and especially with spirituality and energy, things are shades of things, are spectrums rather than in or out. And believe me, that straight line is not there at the end of October saying, you missed the chance, until next year. No, give November a chance. November is a very good month, if I may say so myself. I hope, if not useful, this was entertaining. I would love to hear what your practices are to get closer and use the thinning of the veil, how much they extend, what you do the rest of the year to get closer to your spiritual team. And please do share, because as you know, I'm a skeptical witch, and anything I'm very happy to hear about, because it increases my own experience, makes me try new things, and who knows, I'm gonna find out. So do feel always free to share your experience in the comments. And until the next video, I really hope that we can hex the patriarchy together, because there's need for it.